Or good evening, and thank you all for coming here tonight. On behalf of the Friends of the FIDF, I am proud to bring you retired Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. FIDF is an organization that is very, very dear to my heart. As a retired soldier in the Israeli army that served in the early 80s, I saw firsthand what the FIDF was doing for us as soldiers. We always felt that somebody is caring for us, and we never felt alone in the field, especially from you guys that are living in the United States. I came to this country almost 35 years ago, and I joined the FIDF, and later on I joined the National Board of the FIDF. My dream and my vision is that as we have today 130,000 members, donors in the FIDF, I would like to have one day the entire country and entire Jewish home, every home, and not Jewish, to be part of the FIDF. I really view that what the IDF is doing is not just supporting and helping Israel, but is really supporting and helping people around the world. The FIDF is the only organization that is a true partner to the IDF and authorized by the IDF to be the single only organization in the United States for fundraising for the soldier. Since October 7, the FIDF has provided support for significant needs, such as medical needs, spanning from operational and field ambulances used in the field and emergent in enemy territory. We provided blood plasma, field hospital to care to soldiers and their family. FIDF just committed $80 million to support the mental rehabilitation and PTSD needs in partnership with IDF and Sheba Hospital that is in Tel Aviv. As you hear, FIDF is always there and will be there for the long time. To sum it up, the way FIDF view our soldiers, their job is to take care of Israel, and our job is to take care of them. Please turn your attention to the video screen to watch.
Thank you, FIDF, for everything that you do. It's given us a lot of energy to continue fighting for our country, and for you guys, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, FIDF. Thanks to the cutting-edge medical supply given to us by the FIDF, we're able to help the teams give the best life-saving support to the forces in the field. And it's all thanks to you, FIDF. So thank you.
Thank you so much to the Friends of the IDF. We really feel like you are here in this war with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, FIDF.
תודה, FIDF. עם ישראל חי.
Thank you, FIDF.
עם ישראל חי.
I would like to say thank you to all the FIDF for everything you guys are doing. We are all fighting over here for our freedom and democracy, and we will win this together. Am Yisrael Chai.
And now, I'm proud to introduce retired Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and the owner of Conricus Communication. He recently retired as an IDF Lieutenant Colonel after serving in the IDF for 24 years as a combat commander in Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. As a military diplomat, foreign relationship expert, and international spokesman, he was the first IDF officer to be second to be United Nations headquarters in New York, where he provided strategic analysis for the United Peacekeeping. Please welcome Jonathan.
Shalom, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank FIDF for bringing me here. I've actually never been in this synagogue, and it's an honor just to be here amongst you and see this beautiful building, feel the history, and for a second be part of your community. Very happy to be here today. I wish I was here under different circumstances, and I want to calibrate expectations here. If you have come here on Erev of Shabbat with the intention of leaving feeling uplifted and positive and optimistic, I don't think that I'm the guy at this moment who will provide that, sadly. What I aim to do for 20 minutes is to share the situation on the ground, kind of behind the news and what's happening in Gaza, Judea and Samaria, Lebanon, and of course Syria and other places. We can go further than that. And then to open up for questions for another 20 minutes for whatever questions you may have. I'm very happy to be here today. My sister is also here. She lives in Israel. We live together in Israel, but just so happens that we're here. And it reminded me, when I saw the picture of the soldiers, it reminded me, and when I just said hello to my sister who came, it reminded me that many years ago, when we were both younger, I think about 25 years ago. I was a young soldier in Givati. We were still fighting inside Lebanon. This was 1998 or 99. And my sister was the commander in charge of an intel collection room. So the same type of border observers that we have along the Gaza border and Lebanon, etc. And it just happened to be, without any of us knowing, that my crew and I were on our way out, and we conducted a patrol and an ambush against Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. And my sister was the intel officer in charge of following the movement of us and providing coverage and to make sure that there's no enemy approaching. And only later did we find out that we had indeed been part of the same activity, of course not planned, but we later found out. So that's a little bit of our shared history. About the situation today. I think we first have to acknowledge that sadly 2023 and it looks like 2024, both of these years are going to be very good for our enemies, specifically for Iran. And I know that you guys are very connected to what's happening in Israel. I know that this is a very strong and loving community that says and does in support of Israel, and I can assume that you're all very connected to the news as well. So it won't surprise, but maybe it will surprise you a little bit when I say that if you think back for the last 5 months, how many times did you hear any of the words like centrifuges, or enrichment, or uranium, or heavy water, or Bushehr? You probably didn't hear or read these words because they've been kept out of the communications, because we've all been focusing on the distraction. The distraction from an Iranian point of view is Hamas and Iran. They're serving an Iranian purpose. While the Iranians care about their own regime and the promotion of their number one regime other than existing is to achieve nuclear military capabilities. And for the last 5 months, they have had a tremendous time. Nobody's following their activities. Everybody is focused on Gaza, on Lebanon, on the Houthis in Yemen, and nobody's really dealing with enrichment. And the last report that came out, actually a week ago, by the Atomic Agency, stated that today, according to the limited information that the Atomic Agency has, Iran has enough fissile material to produce 13 nuclear bombs. This doesn't mean that they yet have the bombs. They still have to match it with technology, and they have to find a delivery vehicle, some type of missile, and they have to do testing, etc., etc. But what this report shows, just from now, is that they are progressing. And we're going to talk about Gaza, and we're going to talk about Rafah, and Ramadan, and Jerusalem, and Hezbollah, and everything else, but let's not lose track of what our main enemy is doing, and how they, in a very clever and strategic and manipulative way, are manipulating things in the Middle East for their benefit. Another thing, which I think we should be aware of, is that Iran, I always believe, and as a young soldier and now as a little bit older, former soldier, I always believed in respecting our enemies. And I think that one of the things that we did not do well, or that we did terribly bad, was to correctly assess both the capabilities and the intentions of one of our enemies, Hamas. We underestimated their capabilities. We totally misread their intentions and belittled their intentions and their resolve. But with the Iranians, I think that we're doing the opposite. I think that there's quite an overestimation of actual Iranian capabilities to fight, and we're kind of confusing the Iranian excellence with building proxies and sending proxies to fight for them, and the own Iranian ability to defend themselves and to fight by themselves. The last time that the Iranians fought on their own soil and defended themselves was in the war with Iraq, and they were not brilliant on the battlefield, far from it. But they are very good at building, funding, and controlling proxy organizations. Now, what's regrettable is that both Israel and the US, while they are being attacked by Iranian proxies, we are actually playing into or within the bounds that Iran has established. Iran has proxies, they attack Israel. We retaliate against the proxies. Iranian proxies attack US forces and even kill US service members. 3 of them have been killed lately, and there have been more than 190 different attacks against US troops in the Middle East, and the US retaliates against Iranian proxies. As long as Iran has the ability to continue to fund these proxy organizations, the Houthis, Hamas, or what will be left of it, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, 15 proxy organizations in Syria, as long as they have the money, they will continue to do so because it serves their strategic purposes. Why is that relevant for everybody here? Because as long as Iran will continue to do that, we will have instability and violence and fighting around ourselves in the Middle East. And until we change our strategy, I don't think that we should assume that the enemy will change his strategy when it comes to what they're doing in the Middle East, because from their perspective, things are going quite well. And I want to acknowledge that fact before we start speaking about Gaza. I'm sure you've all read that the cabinet has again approved plans for the IDF and gone ahead and tasked the IDF with advancing. I think that it's very much that the message of that press statement that was delivered today was more intended to create a sense of urgency in the hostage negotiations that are also ongoing, and that they are not yet on the ground. Israeli troops are not yet in Rafah. There still are many things that need to happen before Israeli troops will be in Rafah. But I think, sadly, that Hamas has been able to manage the situation very well. They were playing for time all along. Since the first hostage deal, they were not interested in releasing any more hostages. They had a correct reading of US politics, of US-Israeli relations, and they exploited the fault lines between Washington and Jerusalem, and they used that in order to buy time and to get close enough to the month of Ramadan. Ramadan started a few days ago. The first Friday sermon of Ramadan has already been conducted. It was conducted peacefully. The Israeli security forces were there in great numbers, facilitated unlimited access for Muslim, or limited in a certain extent that only of a certain age, but access for Muslims to pray on the Temple Mount, and no big events of violence happen, which is a good thing. But the Hamas plan was to get close enough to Ramadan so that we wouldn't launch the operation in Rafah. A few words about Rafah. It's been said by various Israelis. From me, from a pure military point of view, I cannot see a situation where Israel achieves its objectives of defending Israeli civilians, dismantling Hamas, and doing anything substantially positive in the future without taking Rafah. The tunnels underneath Rafah are the most important tunnels for Hamas because they are the ones through which all of the weapons are delivered. Without the tunnels, Hamas won't have a future capability to replenish itself and grow again if and when we pull out our forces from the Gaza Strip. And conversely, if we don't take the tunnels, Hamas will rebuild itself. Only a matter of months, maybe a year or two, they will regain their capabilities, and Iran will make it a tremendous effort of theirs to replenish Hamas and to show it as a victory of their axis and of Islamic resistance against Israel. So to whether or not Rafah needs to be taken, for me, is not a question from a military point of view. Needs to be taken in a clever and professional way with minimum collateral damage, getting as many as possible civilians out of Rafah first, and then being very kinetic and strong and violent with Hamas in it, because it's going to be a tough battle. But once we start doing it, I think we're looking at around 3 or 4 months of fighting, and then Rafah will fall, just like Gaza City fell with all of the 12 Hamas battalions that fought there. So did Khan Yunis, or it's in the last stages of doing. So will Rafah. I don't think it's a if, it's only a when, and we only have to get started in order to get there. By the way, depending on what news you consume and which social media, how your algorithm feeds you, I don't know if you are aware, but tactically speaking, on the ground, I'm not speaking politically or diplomatically yet, but tactically on the ground, this war is pretty clear. Despite the very complex environment that the IDF is fighting in, despite the presence of civilians, despite the multitude of weapons and tunnels that Hamas has, in each and every location where there is a clash, an engagement between Israeli troops and Hamas, it ends very clearly. Israeli soldiers win, sadly, sometimes with casualties, and each and every one of our soon, sadly, we're getting close to 600 dead Israeli soldiers, a tremendous number. So none of these victories come at a low price, but each and every engagement ends with the victorious IDF, dead or surrendered Hamas, in every location. And that is what the IDF is building on, and building on success. I am concerned that it has taken Israel a long time to get into Rafah. Momentum is a very important thing when it comes to fighting, and we've lost a few dear weeks. Nothing that cannot be undone, but I really hope that we will get moving swiftly in order to finish the job. And I said it yesterday on BBC when they spoke about the humanitarian suffering and asked me questions along those lines. The sooner Israel starts the fight in Rafah, the sooner the war and the suffering and the misery will end. It won't end before, and there will be suffering, and all of the horrible results of war will continue to be until we get into Rafah and finish the job. Now, up in the north, in northern Israel, we find ourselves in kind of a catch-22 situation. On one hand, Hezbollah has achieved what no Arab military has ever achieved, not the Syrians, the Egyptians, or the Jordanians. Nobody was ever able to push or to evict from their homes 100,000 Israelis. And they've been out of their homes for almost 5 months, which is, it's unprecedented in our history. And I'm surprised that that still hasn't been settled. But Israelis won't be able to go back to their homes before it's safe to do so. And until Israelis go back to their home, we won't be able to end the war in the north. And the war with Hamas is directly linked with the war with Hezbollah, not because we want it that way, but because they are part of the same axis of Iranian proxies. We saw that the last time when we negotiated a temporary ceasefire with Hamas. Fighting stopped in the north as well. So we know that there's a direct link between the two. And from an Israeli perspective, Israeli civilians simply can't go back home before Hezbollah either agrees to diplomatically or is forced to take 5 steps back and to agree to some kind of diplomatic deal, some kind of document that, yes, we're taking 5 steps back and we're going to stay there. Sounds odd, right? I think it's a very un-Middle Eastern thing to do, and I don't think that it's likely that Hezbollah will do it, even though it is in the best interest of Hezbollah and it is in the best interest of Lebanon that they do so, because the other option is war. And I definitely hope that we aren't forced to go there. As you can see from the actions on the ground, Israel has been extremely patient, strategically patient over the last 5 months with regards to Hezbollah. Yes, we've killed 250 Hezbollah fighters, all of them very justified combat casualties, and we've taken out a few senior Hezbollah officers, but of course Israel has prevented a bigger escalation, and we've only struck in areas that are in southern Lebanon and a few up in Baalbek, but of course kept our activities to a bare minimum in order to avoid an all-out war. And an all-out war with Hezbollah would be a totally different endeavor than what we are facing now with Hamas. Hezbollah has about 5 times more firepower than what Hamas has. It has more rockets with bigger warheads, better accuracy. It has more fighters who are better trained and better equipped. So whatever metric you compare, Hezbollah is a formidable enemy, an enemy that Israel can and if forced to will defeat, but it will come at a heavy price for Israel. One that currently Israel, I think, isn't interested in exploring that option. But it is a kind of a gridlock situation, trying to get our hostages back, 134 of them, not being able to do so enough militarily. And I would have hoped and I anticipated that we would have been more successful in getting more of the hostages out by our own might. Sadly, that has not yet happened, and I hope that we will. And that is also why it's so important to go into Rafah, because that is probably the last location where Hamas is hiding our hostages. And we have to look at how all of the areas are connected and to operate as quickly as possible in order to get hostages back, finish the job in Gaza, and then find some kind of solution to de-escalate up in the north. That's a quick interim summary of the complex situation. As we all know, not an easy situation. Many times Israeli officers speak about how complex the situation is, and that's pre-October 7. Today, really, I think that there's hardly a need even for the great video that FIDF are showing, because you don't even need superlatives to describe the complexity of what we're living through. We are fighting for our homes, we are fighting for our existence, for a very basic safety. The fact that there's still almost normal life in Tel Aviv and central Israel, that is beside the point. But if you go an hour south and 2 hours up north, you're in a war zone. And that is something that we cannot and must not tolerate. With that, I think we'll go to questions. Yes? Yeah, you raised your hand first.
I'm going to step in for a second.
Okay.
Why don't we take a seat? We need to facilitate that a little bit. All right, so hold on 1 second, okay? First of all, thank you for being here. I know you'll be with us for Kabbalat Shabbat. I want to thank FIDF. I want to thank my friend Ofer Yardeni for all you do on behalf of the soldiers. Ofer, it's incredible. I want to, the challenges are immense. You said that. I want to drill down a little bit, in particular in the north. You talked about Hezbollah taking 5 steps back. Given what you described with the weaponry they have, the better trained military, why does 5 steps back make a difference, right?
It's mostly related to the type of weapons that Hezbollah has. All of the 8 Israeli civilian casualties that we have sustained so far from Hezbollah fire have been from direct hits by anti-tank missiles. The same type that the Russians are using to fire at Ukrainian facilities and weapons, etc., in their war. Most of them are Kornet missiles, and they have an effective range of about 5.5 kilometers, a little bit more than 3.5 miles. That is why we need that buffer zone. Now, what makes it a bit ironic is that there already is a UN resolution which allegedly is in force from 2006, which was adopted at the end of the war, Resolution 1701, which makes it illegal for Hezbollah to be in southern Lebanon to begin with. There's only supposed to be the Lebanese Armed Forces and UNIFIL. Hezbollah, in UN language, is that southern Lebanon should be free of illegal weapons. That's how they refer to Hezbollah. And despite that, they have been there, they have eroded and really hollowed out that resolution, and that's how we find ourselves in the very situation that we're in. That is also one of the reasons why I'm a bit skeptical about us reaching a diplomatic solution, because up until now, that is what we've been relying on. And sadly, Hezbollah has very cleverly dismantled that and been able to establish itself in southern Lebanon at our border, within smelling distance of what Mrs. Cohen is cooking in Kiryat Shmona.
I mean, I've heard everything from no chance for war to we're waiting for the weather to change to it's inevitable. What are your thoughts about the North? I know you started down that path.
Yeah. I think strategically Israel does not seek war. I think strategically Hezbollah does not want an all-out war. And I think that the Iranians do not want an all-out war. They want, both Hezbollah and Iran would like for Hezbollah to continue to threaten, to destabilize, and to bleed Israel from the north, and to keep the IDF split between these two fronts, the main front in the south and the secondary front in the north. I think that the Iranians don't want Hezbollah to go to war, because if they do, they might be significantly degraded, and then they won't be serving the main purpose for which they are there from an Iranian perspective, and that is to be a deterrent against a preemptive Israeli strike on their nuclear facilities. So if they're spent on defending Hamas and defending Gaza, they are not serving their strategic purpose. And the Iranians are clever and calculated. From their point of view, Gaza is expendable, Hamas is expendable, Hezbollah is a much more important asset, and hence they are not, eagerly running into a war. And I think that they're happy with what's going on now in terms of the balance. The fact that they have 250, almost 260 casualties is a surprise for them. I don't think that they were prepared for that, but it is still something that they're able to contain and manage.
Can you say a little more about the hostages? And, we're seeing these protests in Israel. It seems like Rafah is inevitable. How are the hostages being factored into that operation?
Most of the intelligence that Israel has indicates that they're either under southwestern Khan Yunis or under Rafah, because these are the only areas where the IDF does not yet dominate. And that is one of the reasons why it's so important to get there. Various attempts have been made by Israeli special forces, attempts that all led to casualties in soldiers, sadly, to go underground and rescue hostages. The closest they got, according to what I know, is getting to one of the locations where hostages were held, one of these dungeons that maybe you've seen, and where they basically got, and the closest they got was warm blankets of hostages that were there just before. But they were not able to get them in time. And there have been other efforts as well. Of course, Hamas has been defending these assets as they see our hostages very intensely, and are trying to make it extremely difficult for us to get there. So despite very significant efforts that the IDF, together with Mossad and Shabak and the police, their counterterrorism unit are taking, we have not been able to get to enough hostages. We've been able to rescue 3. And that's great that 3 have been rescued, but many in Israel, everybody in Israel, of course, wants all of them rescued.
How much intelligence does Israel have about the hostages? I mean, when we were there in February, we spoke to parents of a hostage who were working under the assumption that if they haven't heard that their son was dead, they assume he's alive. Is that a fair assumption for the parents of hostages based on intelligence that you have?
Listen, it's an unprecedented situation. No country has faced this type of dilemma or this type of challenge. And yes, I would say that assumption is correct. And sadly, we see that even 153 days after the war started, the family of an Israeli soldier were notified by the authorities that the assumption is, or that they assume that he is indeed dead and that his body is being held by Hamas. So there's new intel coming in. New intel is based on a lot on interrogation of Hamas terrorists that are caught on the battlefield or surrender. They're then interrogated, and we extract a lot of intelligence from them. That is how we've been able to go and attempt other locations. That is also part of how we were able to get the two older gentlemen out from close to Rafah because of intelligence generated on the battlefield. But tachlis, bottom line, not enough. Not enough intel and not enough activity.
Can we talk about this country for a second? You didn't bring that up in your remarks. For several months since October 7th, President Biden, unbelievable support of the operation. Even when it felt like he was wavering a little bit, the sort of rhetoric always was focus on what America does and not what the president says. Over the last week, over the last few days, it seems like the rhetoric has shifted significantly. And both, the president during the State of the Union, Senator Schumer, essentially calling for a regime change. How does that land in Israel? And what's the sort of, what's coming out of Israel in response to the senator and the president?
So I think we need to separate between real actions and statements. Real actions and statements for the first 3.5, 4 months, I think were exceptionally good. And bottom line, in terms of delivery of weapon systems and parts that Israel needs in order to defend itself, still excellent. The military ties are excellent. The communications are excellent. The coordination, the sharing of intel, the efforts to find hostages. Some of the hostages, as we know, are also American citizens. That goes on, and it goes on very well. People tend to focus on off-the-cuff or scripted statements that get headlines. I think that Israelis in general are very appreciative of the type of support that Israel has gotten from the US. I think that Israelis were collectively very happy to see and hear the US president say in the beginning what he said, that the US stands squarely by Israel, and if any of our enemies are thinking about attacking, don't. The positioning of two combat groups, carrier groups, close to Israel was very significant, and I think it put enough time for pause for our enemies, and it may have been very, very important in averting a wider escalation in the region. We'll know once we get Hassan Nasrallah on a chair and have him talking, then we'll know what really influenced his decision-making. But it may have been that. I would, of course, rather not have heard the last statements. And I think that the remarks made yesterday are extremely counterproductive. I think that they do not bring the hostages home. It makes it more difficult to get hostages home because it strengthens the hand of Hamas, because they see fraying of ties between Israel and the US, and then when these statements are also allegedly supported by the White House, that's even worse. So it's endangering hostages. I think they're out of bounds, frankly, and they are not productive in any way, not in defeating Hamas and winning and serving also US regional interests. We're the most important, the most loyal, and the most steadfast American ally in the region, perhaps in the world, and it weakens in that sense. And I have questions about the political wisdom of saying it, but I don't deal in politics, so I wouldn't know.
Okay. We have a few minutes. Do we have a mic? Ross, you're right there. Before you ask your question, let's just remember, question is a statement that ends with a question mark. That goes for everybody.
Sure.
So we have 6 minutes. Let's stay away from speeches and let's ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a million questions, but I'm going to stick to 2 quick ones. I just don't, you were talking about militarily the importance of momentum. So this tension, let's say they do a 6-week ceasefire for the hostages. How does that then deal with trying to get Hamas? Like if you pause for 6 weeks, doesn't that just endanger soldiers when they go back? Or I just wanted to ask that. And then just quickly, how, just when you perform, like when you see the bias of the media and the narrative, like how do you keep your cool and how do you be effective in getting your message across?
The answer to the second question is that for me it's very clear that I am a messenger. Me, my feelings, myself, anything is totally irrelevant, and I'm there to do a job to deliver and to try to persuade people that can be persuaded about the just nature of our actions. And if I lose my temper and if I get unsettled by arrogance or silly questions, then I would be failing at my job. And that's the only thing that, it's a very clear compass. The more substantial question. Of course, Israel would want not to pause the war for even an hour. But these are the conditions that Hamas are adamant about. And when you negotiate and they have something that we want, we have to address those concerns. 6 weeks is a long time, but I think, had we been in a different situation with the proven ability of the IDF to get lots of hostages out in tactical activities, then I think we would have had a different hand. But the hand that we have, or we're playing with the cards that we have, is that that isn't the case, sadly. So we have to work with that situation. Of course, it is difficult, but we saw it the last time. We paused for almost a month, and when the month was over, we went back, and yes, we had to retake a few areas, but eventually doable, and thankfully more than 100 Israeli hostages were able to be reunited with their families. And what the IDF has said, the high commanders, is to the cabinet when they were asked about it, yes, it's doable. Do we like to stop? No. But if this is the way of getting hostages back, then we can live with it.
Let's take one more. Right up, come up to the front here.
How do you respond to the critique that even if Israel is eventually successful in eliminating the military capability of Hamas, that the destruction of property and people has been so extensive in Gaza that we're creating a whole new generation of potential terrorists, both in Gaza, the West Bank, and maybe, unfortunately, even in Israel among the Palestinian community?
When the US-led coalition fought against ISIS, I didn't hear that being said, that fighting against ISIS creates another generation of ISIS. You fight against evil, and you have to fight it, and you have to defeat it. There's no other way of doing it. And there isn't any way else of fighting the type of enemy that we're fighting, which is embedded within the civilian population and uses civilian infrastructure, but to engage them where they are. We would love to have them out in the open desert, and it would take us 10 minutes and we would finish Hamas. But that's not where they're hiding. They're hiding amongst the civilians and using civilian infrastructure. So whether it will cause that in the future or not, it's a non-question, because we have no choice but to do it. If we don't do it, Israelis can't live in their homes. They'll be subjected to another October 7. So what really needs to be focused on by the same people who say that question, which for someone who isn't versed in military things, he could think that. What really the question should be is, okay, what needs to be done the day after, and how can the international community help in replacing the corrupt and hateful institutions that exist in Gaza today, Hamas and UNRWA specifically, and replace them with others that are focused on prosperity, on law and order, on human rights. I don't say democracy because I don't think that they're ready for democracy. I don't think that that's a concept that really works, but an order-based society that isn't focused on jihad and martyrdom and killing Jews, but on building an own future for themselves. And what has failed clearly is the current situation, where they were given self-governance and rule. They voted in Hamas. Hamas took power, and Hamas has turned it into the biggest military base in the Middle East. I understand that many people would go the easy, lazy, intellectual way and blame Israel for it. But you don't blame Iraqis for having ISIS in Iraq, and you don't blame anybody else for facing, Al-Qaeda. This is the same type of organizations, and you fight them and you defeat them, and then you try to educate those who continue to live in choosing a different path. And if they don't, you fight them again.
Lieutenant Colonel Conricus, it's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you. I know that you will be sticking around and sharing some words during Kabbalat Shabbat. And again, I want to thank the FIDF for making this connection. You should know that on Purim, as you make your contributions for Mishloach Manot, that is being directed through the FIDF and will benefit the soldiers on the ground. So to you, to the community, thank you. It's incredible work these brave soldiers are doing. And again, it's a privilege to host you here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom. We'll
Shabbat
start
Shalom.
in about 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.